Russia has started selling stakes of German Wintershall and Austrian OMV in projects that were realized jointly with Gazprom. The West is vigorously discussing the inhumanity of the ruined business of the Austrians and Germans with the Kremlin's light hand. But is the act so harsh towards Western gas businessmen? The decree was signed by the President of the Russian Federation back in January, but discussions of the situation are still ongoing. Nationalization of the assets of foreign companies. This is the irreconcilable opinion of the West regarding the sale of shares of Wintershall and OMV. However, the issue here is not so much the appropriation of assets as the freezing of their accounts. The companies will not be able to use the funds in Russia's accounts. That is, in essence, we are forcing gas companies to sell their assets and leave the Russian market, leaving Gazprom as a monopoly. Legally, all the money will remain with the foreign company, frozen in Russian accounts. Let me remind you how Europe once squeezed Russian business out of its markets. No one there even pretended that the accounts were frozen. There was full-fledged nationalization. The same Poland simply took away from businessmen their business and their capital and deported the owners under a plausible pretext in the eyes of the EU. They also froze gold and foreign exchange reserves in European countries, when the money is Russian, but it is impossible to withdraw it from foreign accounts. Last year, Germany took over Gazprom's subsidiary in their country without paying anything to the main company or Russia. But when the Russians started to do the same, there is no limit to the outrage of Europe and America. Although back in 2022, the Federal Republic of Germany understood the seriousness of the termination of energy supplies from Russia to Europe, but did everything to ensure that they were, in fact, terminated. At that time, Scholz talked a lot about it, and many European countries were even preparing to cut off electricity and reduce heating in homes. Unlike America and Canada, the EU countries' dependence on imports has been and remains huge, although they are trying their best to compensate for these shortages through holes in the budget. The latter, by the way, they tried to plug by rebellious farmers, first by putting the cattle epidemic on the brakes, and then by withdrawing privileges on diesel fuel prices, on which farmers are completely dependent. What ended, we are all watching now. In the spring of 2022, there was active talk of gas import substitution from Russia. At that time, the bet was placed on Israel, which had not yet been drawn into the conflict. Today, the Promised Land is no longer concerned with providing the world with blue fuel. Israel has clashed with Hamas and is waiting for help from the old and new worlds. At that time, Europe shouted that it would refuse more than half of Russian gas, which turned out to be simply impossible. And even the gas, which they allegedly refused, is bought through resellers from the same Russia, but at triple the price. And Poland secretly transports Russian coal to the ports at night because it is ashamed to tell the people that we cannot cope. By the way, attempts to replace Russia's LNG with America have also failed miserably. During the election campaign, Biden had already frozen the construction of plants in Mexico, which brought the EU literally to hysterics. Berlin then called Washington an unreliable ally that could not be relied upon. Biden, in turn, assured that all agreements would be fulfilled. But the very fact that such an incident took place is already telling. When Gazprom was the main supplier of blue fuel, there was no question of any violation of agreements. Everything worked exactly in accordance with the supply agreement. Today, Europe will have to establish new ties in energy trade and feel the bitterness of the consequences of such cooperation. So Russia's current actions to sell Wintershall and OMV are dictated by simple common sense. Russia is not rushing to sell gas and oil, having reoriented itself to Asian markets and building new friendly alliances with India and China. So why do they need German and Austrian companies on Russian territory that are no longer friendly to the country? Name me at least a dozen Russian business projects on Western territories, which work there without infringement to this day. I'm afraid you won't remember a couple even by Googling. All of them survived, nationalized, without ceremony, and they froze their assets until better times. This money is not theirs. They have enough to do with their own Gazprom, and those who do not like Russia's policy go to work in their native Austria and Germany if it is so bad in Russia.